That's such a great point because I think in many ways we sort of look at people's circumstances in their lives or experiences they're having. Often the model is acute care. Like there's an issue, we're going to deal with it, fix it, move on, and it's done and it's behind us. But the an identity as gay or lesbian, bisexual individual or a gender identity um, is more likely something that is neither chosen nor going to change. And so the real challenge then becomes this is going to be endemic. It's going to be an experience that continues throughout life.
Welcome, Tom, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Gustavo. It's nice to be with you. Thank you.
Perfect. And maybe our listeners might not be very familiar with you. They might not know the work you do and maybe some books you've published. So could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I guess my principal area of writing and speaking has been the fact that I'm gay, and knew that at quite a young age. But I was very certain that I could pray it away, right? That the Lord would change me, and I wouldn't have to, live my life with that constraint. I went on a mission and thought that I had a wonderful experience and thought this is great. The Lord has changed me, and I got home and discovered that indeed I had not been changed. So about 40 years ago, after BYU and a very short marriage that was annulled, good luck translating that, Gustavo, I felt like I'd gone as far as I could go in the church and needed to see what I could find of my life outside of it. And I asked to be excommunicated. That began a journey both for myself and for my family, over the next decades. And that's really the subject of a book that I wrote called That We May Be One, a gay Mormon's perspective on faith and family. Now, you can tell that was written before President Nelson, his time as president of the church. It would now be a gay Latter-day Saints perspective, but it was really about the journey that my family and I took in that regard. And also, as I was some years later coming back to activity in church as a non-member, the engagement that a ward family and I had, and the experiences and learning for me and others in that process.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, when I first learned about your story, I saw you on Mormon Stories.
Hmm.
So when I watched the episode, I thought it was a story about living, since most stories are about that.
Yeah.
And then as I kept listening to the story, and then I got to the part where you decided to be a member again, I was surprised. I didn't expect that at a Mormon Stories podcast, but I think that your story is pretty interesting and can give a lot of insight to people who might be going through the same thing you went through years ago, and
Yeah.
also family members and people who might not be very familiar with it,
Right.
and want to know how to do better, how to be better.
Right.
And
One thing I
sorry.
should say, by the way, a good friend of mine that you may know, Sherry Dew, as we were nearing completion of that book and ready to go ahead with publishing, she said, "Okay, it's your last chance. If you don't want to do this, say so now." And I said to her, my biggest fear of putting the book out was that people would assume the story was over. I'd figured I'd had all the answers and everything was neatly tied up in a bow. Whereas I feel like even today, I'm still trying to figure all these things out and to find answers that help me continue to move forward. So I hope anyone who listens to this understands that that I'm a work in progress, and this is a perspective on a point in time of a journey that's continuing to develop.
Perfect, thank you. And I think that's very important to clarify. We're all in faith journeys. That's the name of the
Yes,
channel.
right.
and the journey continues. Our journey is our lives. So as long as we're alive, we're still moving on.
So true. Yep.
So in order to maybe understand a little more about your story, I think that maybe we could go a little bit in the past
Yes.
and talk a little bit about your church upbringing. And, before we get into the story, were you born a member or were you a convert? How was your experience growing up in the
Yes.
church?
So my parents were both born as members of the church. My mother's father had been baptized in Sweden and immigrated to the United States. And on her mother's side, it was her grandfather, who was a young boy in Denmark when his family converted and immigrated to the United States. And then on my dad's side, also his grandfather on both sides, grandparents, had joined the church. My great grandfather was in Arizona, which is the only. I now live in Arizona, and there was a big period in between of no family here. But he actually, for a time, lived in the colonies of Mexico, and so for a time, I thought that my grandfather had been born in Mexico, which I thought was pretty cool. But it turns out he was born in Arizona, and then they'd gone to Mexico shortly after, and then they returned to Utah after some time there because of health reasons. In any event, I am the youngest of 5 sons in my family, and the oldest is Elder D. Todd Christofferson. So the reason anybody cares about the story is that my parents, who I think handled this so magnificently, are also the parents of Elder Christofferson. So in some sense, I think that's why people find the story interesting.
I see. And yeah, honestly, I think that sometimes we are too quick to put labels, right?
Yes.
Uh, I could have said, his Elder Christopher's brother and hype that up, right? But I
Yeah,
think that individual stories are interesting regardless, you know?
I agree. And I think my family's story is first and foremost a family. It isn't a church sponsored story, right? It's just the experience of 5 brothers and their parents, wives and children who really wanted to stay connected in love, regardless of what might happen at any point in time in a journey of a sibling. And that, so you mentioned that I had my career had taken me to various parts of the U.S., New York and California, to Europe twice. But as I was living in San Francisco, I met the man who became my partner of nearly 2 decades, and so we built a very happy life together. But at a certain point, as we had moved back to New York, he had decided to do a mid-career change and to go to medical school at age 42. And I, at that point, had really felt like I wanted to start having more of an emphasis or put more effort into my spiritual life. And we just had a very happy life. There were so many things to enjoy in our times, but I just felt like I wanted to make more of an effort on that regard. And so I began to go to the local ward where we lived. And initially, I didn't tell anybody. I just sort of came into sacrament meeting and sat in the back and left when it was over. But I began to feel those spiritual feelings I was hoping for, and wanted to delve into that more deeply. And so I had a conversation with the bishop, and I said to him, look, I'm not a member of the church. My partner and I have made commitments to each other that I think would mean that I'm not very likely to ever have covenants again. But I've been attending your ward. I'd like to continue. And now that you know who I am I welcome? And his very immediate response was, yes, please come join us and bring your partner with you if he's willing. He said that his desire for the ward was that everyone in it would learn to become better disciples of Jesus Christ. And he said, you will bring a perspective that helps us, and we have perspectives that will help you. And that really turned out to be the case. I felt like there was so much that I learned from those good people and their warmth and welcome and acceptance of me, and on the occasions that my partner would join. But I think they also learned some things from us, that the circle of God's love is broad, and that a chapel is a place where anyone who enters should feel his warmth and welcome, and feel that this is a place they can be at home. And so there was a time of really 7 years of attending that ward as a non-member, and really the growth that took place there.
Perfect. I see. And the fact that you enter a word that was welcoming and kind to you and your partner was, I think, that sadly lucky in a way, right? Um, I think that sometimes when it comes to people who might not feel welcome, they can be either part of the LGBTQ community, or it can be people who left the church, people who returned early from a mission,
Right.
all those spectrums. I think that maybe for them can be a bit of Russian roulette when you go to a ward. It can either
Yes.
be welcoming and kind to you, or they can just silently judge you, or trying to put conditions to love and acceptance. So now that you mentioned that you are in this ward and you feel accepted, did you ever feel like there was any conditions, or that people were expecting you to change who you were to return to
Right.
church?
That's such a great point, because I think in many ways we sort of look at people's circumstances in their lives or experiences they're having, and I don't know how to. Hopefully, you can translate this into Spanish, but often the model is acute care. Like, there's an issue, we're going to deal with it, fix it, move on, and it's done and it's behind us. But an identity as gay or lesbian, bisexual individual, or a gender identity, is more likely something that is neither chosen nor going to change. And so the real challenge then becomes, this is going to be endemic. It's going to be an experience that continues throughout life. So our engagement in the church, in a sense, can't be like that acute care. We're going to take you to the emergency room, fix it, and off we go, right? This is going to be a reality of life that allows us to learn and grow and develop, but in its core element isn't going to change. And there are two things I'd say about that. One is, all of us have the freedom, whatever the circumstances in our life, to choose to be followers of Jesus Christ. So that's a decision any one of us can make, regardless of any other realities or identities in our lives. But the second thing is, I like to draw the analogy, in my experience of being gay, as an example to someone who's born into a family of great wealth, right? So it's simply a reality of their lives, but they have a choice to make about whether this is going to be something that enriches their character, allows them to grow and to be of worth and use to their fellow men and women, or something that causes them to turn inward, only think for themselves, and essentially be useless to anyone around them. And so I feel the same way for the reality of my life of being gay. Like, it's an attribute, an experience, an element of who I am that I hope is something that allows me to be more sympathetic, more caring, more engaged with people who may not feel that they fit in, more aware of other people who may not feel that they fit. And so that in that sense, my experiences can allow me to be useful to the Lord and to people around me. Or, again, I can just feel like, well, this is something I'm really mad at God for doing it, and I'm going to just turn away. And so I think that's a choice, a reality that we can each make our own and decide how we're going to allow it to form our characters.
I understand, and thank you for sharing that. I think that, I think we'll talk about it later on in the interview, but it's
Okay?
interesting how maybe religion in this situation can feel conflicting, sometimes contradicting each other.
Yes.
But there's a maybe there's a beauty in all the messiness in a way, right?
Yes.
So, now that, continuing on with the story, and as you find yourself in this ward,
Yeah.
what happened next?
Well, let me take one step back, as I sort of jumped to the word without talking about my own family. And I think the key message for my family about, I would say the first 2 years after I came out were really challenging. And it was tough for us all to figure out how to talk to each other without defensiveness, right? I mean, my parents could hear me being happy as I explored my life and think that I'm somehow denigrating or taking lightly the things that have been so meaningful in their lives, and frankly that their lives are based on. Or I could hear them and feel that they were always criticizing or negative about kind of how I'm trying to move forward. And so it took us a while to figure out honestly how to engage in ways that allowed us to lessen the defensiveness and intentionally stay connected. But about 2 years after I had come out, we were having a family reunion, and my parents, one night after my nieces and nephews, who were then very young, had been put to bed, they invited my brothers and their wives and I to come into their bedroom and to have a sort of family council. And we began with prayer. And I remember that my father talked about what he felt was so important about loyalty and unity in our family. That whatever might happen to any one of us, we would have a commitment to each other that we would remain united, that we would always care for one another and endeavor to be engaged in each other's lives with unity as a family. And then my mom talked about the notion. She said, when you boys were young, I thought we were the perfect little Mormon family, right? The boys, we all went to church. Everything was great. We were excited about the things that we could do living in New Jersey, far away from the headquarters of the church, to help other people come to know what we believed about Christ and the restoration of his gospel. And she said, but, life goes on. And as you grow up, you discover that life isn't perfect, right? And there are challenges that have to be met and dealt with. And she said, so I feel like we can be perfect in our attempts to love each other, but we're never going to be perfect in other aspects of our lives. It's just not the way life is. And she said, to my brothers and their wives, the most important lesson that I think your children, our grandchildren, will learn from watching how our family treats their Uncle Tom is that nothing they can do will ever take them outside the circle of our family's love. And she said they'll learn that lesson without words, right? They learn it because they watch how the family engages and loves and embraces and includes Tom. And they will understand that that will be the case for them as well, whatever challenges come up in their lives later on. And so that was really kind of what guided our family from then on. When I met my partner, he was included in our family. Everything the family did included both of us. And so we felt very much engaged, loved, welcomed, accepted, and that was the model that our family moved forward with. It's not that my parents didn't still have questions, or any of us had questions we couldn't necessarily answer about what does this mean in the world to come after this life. What does it mean for our sealing blessing as a family? I don't know. But I think what we came to understand is that we could trust in the mercy and love of our Heavenly Parents and Savior, and could leave those unanswered questions in their hands. But we could move forward in love and unity and stay connected as a family and do our very best as individuals to live Christian lives, trying to follow as disciples of Jesus Christ in whatever circumstances our lives would provide.
See, thank you. And I think that's a beautiful part to add, because I have family members and from all sides who have experienced these things. They have had challenges. I had cousins and people who are part of the LGBTQ community and things like that, and I've seen the real struggle that can come from here's who I love, like maybe a parent, for example, and here's what I believe. And for a number of years, maybe there was the idea that I had to choose one or the other.
Yeah.
And I think that it's beautiful to see how we don't have to do that, and how love and loyalty and friendship and kindness doesn't need to have conditions or
Yes.
like maybe we'll love you, Tom, if you one day you return to church
Right.
or things like that. So I
Right.
think it's important to say that.
Or we love you so that you will return to church. That isn't really love if it's essentially an effort to cause another person to do something. Even it may be a loving desire, but our heavenly parents and Savior are bound by the individual agency, right? They won't tread on the agency of us as individuals to make our choices, to willingly choose to follow them. And nor should we tread on the agency of someone else. In my view, our opportunity is simply to feel the love of the Savior and transmit it as broadly and widely and deeply as we can to all around us, and trust that the Lord and His Spirit will work in the lives of individuals as and when He knows and thinks best. Not our job to convert other people, our job to love them and help them to feel His love, and then trust in the process there. I do, it reminded me one other thing I thought of there, though, which is sometimes we have this idea that if we're too loving, if we're too accepting, if we're too kind, we're condoning someone else's sin, right? And so I think we have to start off by saying, well, who do we think isn't sinning? So if we are afraid to love a sinner because it condones, we have got no one to love, including ourselves. So I think the point there is, to me, how we avoid condoning is how we live our own lives. Am I trying to be faithful to everything that I believe? Am I trying as best I can to follow the spiritual promptings in my life for myself? And not how eloquently am I telling other people to live their lives? Or what am I trying to do to cause someone to change their behavior themselves? Just again, I think the point there is, in our respect for the that every person can be an agent to act for themselves, not to be acted upon, then it really is, our focus is, what can I do to draw closer to the Savior, to make His character more of my own, and to be an example of that love and consistent engagement to all those around me.
I completely understand, and thank you for that. I think that's something that we also can struggle with, and yeah, the the love, the condoning, and not just in this, but with different things in
Yeah.
life, and I think that loving meaningful relationships can go beyond that and find a way to make it work. And now that you've mentioned this family background and this loving background that you had, I think that is a special experience. I think that sometimes you don't get the same family love and support in these cases. So I think that it was very special that you had those experiences in your family.
Yes, I agree.
And now that we move on and we catch up to the war, your partner, the bishop, you're there and you feel the need to maybe work on your spiritual life.
Yes.
And at this time, were you considering uh, joining the church again? And if you uh, did you had a partner, uh, did you think that maybe I can join and still be together? Or did you feel like maybe, you know, separating was the only way to move on? What were your thoughts? I bet it was a conflicting situation.
It was the period of time we're talking about is spanned 7 years when I first started to attend the ward until the point at which I did decide to be baptized. But for most of that period, I just assumed I would be as engaged as I could be as a non-member, but could find the ways to serve and to be useful and to continue to grow in my own spiritual sense because of the connection in that congregation. right? That being able to receive the gifts that others would offer and to become better able to bring my gifts to the body of Christ as well from the experiences I'd had. So I just assumed that it would be that. And then after I'd been going for about 6 years, I really did start to feel a great desire to be able to be in the temple again. And part of that really stems from my feeling of the great purpose of restoration is the binding of the family of heaven. So the way we accomplish that in the temple is through the sealing of couples and nuclear families. But the effect of all of those sealings is to bind the entire family of heaven again. And to me, I love my family. I want to have that connection forever. But I know I have a place in the family of my heavenly parents. And that is not reliant on whether I'm sealed, because I am their child and I'm sealed to them in that sense. And I'm not denigrating sealing by any sense. I don't want anybody to hear that. I'm just saying that at that point in time, it was deeply meaningful to me to know that wherever I was in my own life, I had a place in the family of my heavenly parents. And I wanted to be a part of extending that binding process to everyone who has ever lived or will ever live. And so I began to think about what it would take to be baptized and to begin to make covenants. And so I was having conversations with my bishop and stake president and with my partner. And so at a point we ended our physical relationship with each other, but maintained our emotional connection, the life that we had built together. And that allowed for baptism to take place. I had hoped that, that nearly 2 decades together would mean that the emotional connection was so deep and powerful and meaningful that the physical part having ended would still be something worth keeping. Over time, my partner came to feel that wasn't really a happy place for him, and then after having been baptized, the relationship ended. And that's been hard. Like, I don't love being single. I don't know that I always will be. I just try to take this one day at a time to figure it out. But I know other couples now where they would say they have a romantic attachment to each other, but they also do not have a physical relationship. Each holds a temple recommend. They may or may not live in the same physical location. And so I think people are finding ways to be able to try and do the two things they most want, to have love in their life, someone they can build their life with, and also to continue their commitment to being disciples of Jesus Christ. Now, everybody's going to find their own way to do that. And some will feel that they can't do that with full membership in the church. And I certainly understand that. That was my experience for several decades. And so I think, I hope that as members of the church, we have a desire in our hearts to ensure whatever decisions individuals make about what's the healthiest, happiest way forward for them, that they never pay a price of losing our love and our desire to welcome them in a chapel. And I think if we read 3 Nephi 18, the Lord is pretty clear with us that the chapel is a place everyone, whether they are numbered among his people or not, are to be welcomed and included and prayed over. And that should be the reality that anyone experiences when they push open those chapel doors, that here's a place of love. This is a place where people love mercy and want to extend it to everyone and to receive it for themselves. Whatever decisions anyone's made about how to move forward in their lives, that this is always a place you're going to be welcomed and at home. That's, I think, incumbent on us if we want to follow what Christ has said to us.
I understand, and yes, sometimes we wish there was a one answer works for all approach.
Yes.
And yeah, there are many ways. I've heard people who what's the word? The mixed orientation marriage works.
Yes. Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't, and it ends terribly. Sometimes uh, there are examples like the ones you mentioned, and sometimes people choose celibacy, and
Yeah.
now that we take a look back, at your story and your experiences, and just out of curiosity, uh, when did you get baptized? How many years
It was
passed
in
since?
2014. So
Okay.
we're getting closer to 10 years.
Like, so you've had quite an experience since then. It's
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
a few years. And first of all, I wanted to, sort of ask a maybe theological question
Sure.
uh, regarding this, because um, it can seem contradictory that there's a God
Mhm.
who's our Father and loves us and created us to feel love, to feel connection, and then the very same God seems to tell some people, except for you.
Yes.
So that can be unfair in a way, right? So how do you feel about that?
I, um, I feel like each individual has got to find out the will of the Lord in their own lives, how best they can learn, how best they can grow. And among the things we want to learn is how to love, right? And so each individual is going to, try to be guided by the Spirit in making the best decisions they can in their lives and move forward. I think I'm grateful for the experiences that I had in trying to love someone more than I love myself and learning that process. I think I think the Lord can sanctify all learning to our good um, when we reach points that we're willing to ask Him to heal the wounds of the learning and to allow us to use what we've learned in His service. Um, I think our stories aren't written, maybe not even after we die, in the sense that the process of how we are trying to become as Jesus and His parents are is an ongoing process. I don't think it ends with death. I think that's really just a new beginning. But again, my sense is it's that we each have to figure out how best to live the commandments and follow the Spirit in our lives, and to recognize that as often as we fall short, we are disinclined to judge anyone else's progress or path, but rather to take as our baptismal covenant that our journey is to share one another's burdens and to walk beside one another and do our best to support and sustain and uphold each other as we are each doing the best we can. I love that quote of President Monson's that he said so frequently, that the people around us are just doing the best they can in the circumstances of their own lives. And they don't need our condemnation. They need our love and support to help them continue to learn and grow. And we pray that others will give that same gift to us. We're not perfect where we are. And we just want to be able to continue to use the lessons of life to allow the Lord to change our hearts to become more like His.
I see. Thank you for sharing that. And now that we are trying to find a way to make it work in our personal lives, trying to seek that revelation, that personal revelation from God. There are some things that are clear, some things that aren't, and we're just trying to learn from Him, from
Yes.
each other, and I think that takes us to maybe the elephant in the room, which is the
Mm.
church itself, the organization of the
Right.
church. And some people, for example, when it comes to criticisms and things like that, one might say, man, I don't know why people um, act like, I don't know, maybe seer stones are such a big deal, right?
Uh-huh.
uh, and then people might say, well, maybe it's because Joseph Fielding Smith uh, publicly said that those things never happened. So,
Right.
uh, so I think something like that happens here. Like, man, why don't bishops, why don't members are more compassionate? And sometimes people might say, well, maybe, like, having you consider that maybe the church has maybe not sponsored as much love or as much acceptance as we think they should. And I think the perfect example of that is the infamous 2015 policy
Mhm.
and the eventual 2019 reversal of the
Right.
policy. So I'll just give a quick overview just so
Mhm.
listeners can get all caught up to date. If I'm missing something, because I bet I'm missing something, you can
Okay.
let me know. But basically, if I understand correctly, the 2015 policy stated that children from LGBTQ couples couldn't get baptized until they were at least around 18,
Right.
and, like, in a way publicly denounced uh, the practice.
Right.
Is that correct?
It is. It was modeled, as I understand it, after the policy that had been in place around uh, polygamous marriages. So that take place, currently in some of the fundamentalist groups that had broken off from the church. So the idea was that the children of those unions couldn't be baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints until, as adults, they could reach their own conclusions about polygamy and the church's teachings, and then decide what they wanted to do as adults. There was another element of that, which was that same-sex marriage, the fact of same-sex marriage was seen as apostasy and moved into the handbook of instructions under the heading of apostasy, requiring church disciplinary action. So that was another piece that happened. The interesting thing to me about that policy was that from the beginning there was an exception allowed. An application could be made to the first presidency for ordinances for children if the local leaders, the bishop and stake president, felt that that was the right outcome. And you mentioned sort of roulette. I think the guiding principle of the church, which can be so frustrating but is so essential, is that every individual is an individual, and the Spirit can guide that individual's priesthood leader to the right outcome in a given situation, rather than every rule applying to everyone in every case. But in any event, to go back to this policy, as it turned out, as I have heard and read in various places, many bishops and stake presidents did feel that the children of these parents were coming to primary, that their parents were supportive of them coming to primary, their parents were supportive of them being baptized, recognized that what they were learning or hearing at church might not be supportive of the parents' relationship, but still wanted their children to have that experience in church and wanted them to be baptized. And in those circumstances, leaders felt like, well, if that's the understanding, if that's the background that these children are being raised in, why would we not want them to continue to progress as members of the church from age 8 onward? And as I've read and been told, every single application for an exemption to the policy was granted. So at a certain point, it became, well, what's the exception? What's the policy? If anytime anybody says, yeah, but this shouldn't apply here, we agree. And I think that perhaps is part of the reason that policy was changed, however we want to say it, revoked. I don't know what the proper term is that the church uses, but in any event, was the apostasy thing was taken away out of the handbook, and the restriction on ordinances for children of same-sex couples was taken away.
Yeah, and we talked about this before taping, but here in Mexico, as far as I know, I can guarantee that maybe 80% didn't know this happened.
Right.
And now that it's been reversed, uh, I I bet that people have not heard of the situation very well.
Yeah.
And I think and I said, I'm just speaking for Mexico. Maybe the rest of Latin America, it was clear, but I think that here, for example, it's a very Catholic country, and it can, and as Christians, the principles can be a bit more conservative than usual.
Right.
So I think that the church's family proclamation and things like that weren't
Right.
as, what's the word, as controversial as in other
Right.
places, because it was the same thing everyone else thought. So I think that might be part of the reason why there wasn't a huge impact here.
Yeah.
But I've heard the impact in the US was huge. I've
Right.
tried to do
Yeah.
research on my end, but at least in my case, I found that sometimes trying to find stories and what happened can be a little muddy. It's not
Yeah.
as clear as I wish it was online. But I wanted to ask you because I've heard people say that this thing was, just something that took
Right.
place a few years ago. And I've heard people that say that this is what caused mental health, suicide to just reach a peak and things like that. So
Right.
people often portray this as something that destroyed people's lives. And,
Right.
based on your experience, was it one? Was it the other? Was it a bit of both? What was the
Well,
impact it
I
had?
think you bring up a very good point, which is part of the way we understand the world is through the lens of the culture in which we live. And so the culture of Western Europe, of the US, of Canada, had moved very quickly toward acceptance of what would be called marriage equality. So the more that people knew their children, their relatives, their coworkers, their neighbors, their friends, and could see the relationships uh, being healthy and allowing people to really um, find a rhythm in their life, find a way to move forward, uh, changed attitudes very quickly. So people weren't hiding anymore, and when it's out in the open, then there was a lot of acceptance. And so, in opinion polls in the U.S. and Western Europe in particular, the majority of people favored marriage equality. And so, I think what had been happening within the church had been that there was a greater desire to include LGBTQ individuals in the church, to be more inclusive and engaging in families, and a willingness to support people as they were finding the path that they thought was going to be best for themselves going forward. So when the policy happened, I would say at the time that I came out, the most common way for families to deal in the church with a gay kid, as an example, was you had to choose the child of the church, and they chose the church. When the policy happened, what seemed to me, at least anecdotally among people that I knew well, they felt like they had to choose between the child and the church, and they chose the child. And so entire families, generations, were leaving the church because they felt that their child wasn't accepted and welcomed and included equally in the church. And so when the policy was revoked or changed or relaxed, whatever, again, I don't know what the terminology the church used for that. Um, then a number of other people felt like, well, wait a minute, if this was so important that we had to, break up families because of it, how come it now just goes away and as if it had never happened? And in my own family, I mentioned to you that my great grandparents lived in the colonies for a bit. It was because my great grandmother was the second wife in a polygamous relationship, and my great grandfather was sentenced to prison and had been sent to the Detroit House of Corrections. And the first wife and my great grandmother had to keep the children, and as best they could, the people in the community forced them off their farm. They really had nothing practically to live on but the kindness of other people that were helpful. Um, when there was the cessation of polygamy in the church, the manifesto issued by Wilford Woodruff, to my great grandmother, that was something that was a cause for her to wrestle with her faith. She felt that they had sacrificed so much to do what they felt the Lord had asked them to do, to live the new and everlasting covenant. They accepted that their lives had been ruined, that the husband's health had been lost in this prison, that they'd had to move across the country to a different country and back again, simply in trying to follow what they thought the Lord had asked them to do. And how could he now say it wasn't actually needed? And there's a beautiful story in her history about that, about how she feels the Spirit accepting of her sacrifice and sanctifying the sacrifice that had been made. And now that she could go forward in a different arrangement, but still knowing that the Lord knew who she was, cared about her, and would continue to bless her. And so, again, everybody has their own experiences with feeling that as things change, was my sacrifice necessary? Did the Lord require it? Will the Lord acknowledge it and bless me for my desires? And to me, that answer through my own family circumstance is, when we're doing the best we can to follow where we feel the Spirit is leading us, the Lord accepts the desires of our hearts. And that becomes something that he can, again, sanctify to our good, even as things change. I love the 9th article of faith, that the Lord will yet reveal many great and important things pertaining to his kingdom. I hope that we're each praying for that. I hope that each one of us prays that the Lord will give us greater light and knowledge on any topic at any time, that we desire to be taught more, to understand better, to have a broader understanding of all the things that he wishes to teach us, even when sometimes that feels like it changed what we understood before. That somehow what we thought would never change has now changed. And how can we continue to learn and grow in that circumstance? Because we've asked for light and knowledge. We've asked for him to help us to grow and to be prepared for anything he will choose to reveal to us. I think, frankly, that's a responsibility as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right? That as Latter-day Saints, we are asking the Lord to enlarge our minds and our hearts and to help us be prepared for whatever he will choose to say.
Yeah, I agree. And now that I think that podcasts and content creation about the church online, I think it has moved more towards what can we do as Latter-day Saints, right? This is an active role instead of just a passive church membership, like just getting policies or rules or things like that every now and then from prophets and apostles, and then just obeying without doing anything. So
Right.
I think that that's important. And now I've seen that we've also had struggles with this. Again, I've seen that happen more in the US rather than here in Mexico. But we have the whole musket incident and BYU and all of that. And I think that now, when you mentioned a few minutes ago that sometimes people don't know when love becomes condoning, and that reminded me of a quote that or a dilemma that I've seen online a lot lately, and that is love advocacy? And some people say love is not, and some people say love is advocacy. And I think that would mean if you love someone, maybe who's gay, for example, that means that you will make sure they can I don't know, maybe get loss approved, get married, and all of that. So people say, if you love them, but don't get involved in that, you don't really love them. So it can be messy. But how do
Right.
you see the current situation?
I'm not sure there's one easy answer or clear answer to that, with the exception that, the Lord sees each one of us as individuals, and knows the circumstances of our lives, knows the biology of our bodies, the chemistry of our brains, all the things that have shaped who we are. And he, above all, knows the desires of our hearts. And so I think that's the ultimate place of both guidance and advocacy, right? That we are pleading with the Lord to bless and lift and care for all those we love, but recognizing that He knows the way to do that far better than we do. And so our love is not diminished by the fact that we can't tell Him how to accomplish it. And I live in a ward here that is very quirky. It's a very diverse mix of people from different cultures and backgrounds. There are Native Americans and Latino, Hispanic people. There are people from the Pacific Islands. There are African Americans. There are pale faces like me. I mean, there's some of everything in our ward. They're age described. They're young people, old people, young families. Not so many of those, but people who've lived in the ward for their entire lifetimes, and people who are only here for a year. The missionaries have great success in this congregation because when they bring someone in, that person is immediately welcomed. People go out of their way to notice someone they haven't met before and sit and talk and get to know them and welcome them, include them. I feel like my very quirky little ward is a part of Zion, is a place of Zion, because people are far more concerned with whether people have enough to eat, whether they have a place to stay, whether they have transportation to get to a job, than they are with someone's doctrinal understanding, right? It's just a place of love. And to me, the law is love, and obedience follows it. We can obey someone we don't love, but when we love someone, obedience becomes just a natural product because we're so eager to draw closer. And so I just think if we focus on love, everything else will follow. I think that's why the Lord said what Jesus said, the first two great commandments are what they are, that we learn to love our heavenly parents and Him, and that we learn to love what He loves about everyone around us. That's going to center our lives in a way that simply worrying about obedience or checklists or what's a commandment or what's not never will, because it gives us direction, and it orients us towards hearts that become as His, and then minds that are susceptible of enlargement, that we will continue to learn how His gospel allows everyone to grow, as we just find ways to serve Him and them, and stop worrying about obedience in and of itself or commandments in and of themselves. It's just when we focus on His love and how to transmit it, everything else will fall into place.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's a great way to conclude this interview, and the theme that especially in this case, we got commandments and personal revelation, we have church leaders, and we have families. We have many things to take into account. So I think that something I like about what you said is that you've always focused on being a disciple of Christ, and I think that sometimes we lose that focus. Sometimes it's loyalty to Russell M. Nelson, or loyalty to me, and I think that we can forget that Jesus is there, and He's the one who heals and the one who guides, and I think that we should strive to do better at that.
I absolutely agree. I think one of President Hinckley's favorite sayings was that the church is intended to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. So maybe maybe it's a good little self-test of how am I doing in learning to keep the two great commandments? Am I comfortable, or do I need to have my boat rocked a little bit to cause me to think and stretch and grow? And I think that's what you said, Gustavo, so beautifully, that as our hearts are aligned with Christ and we desire to draw close to Him, to learn His will in our lives, then so many things become less important, and we can focus more on comforting the afflicted, and realize that that's not always going to be comfortable for us, because he will require us to keep learning how to love different people who aren't easy, and in circumstances that challenge us because they're hard.
See, and now the very last question, my I think I've said that twice already, but uh, this is perhaps different from the theme itself, and it's more about Tom. And I think that religion, organized religion, can be at the most it can be looked upon as something good,
Yeah.
but not necessarily something true.
Right.
So when it comes to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I think that when things like this happen, and when people start saying, for example, that prophets aren't perfect and we shouldn't expect that, and I feel like sometimes the conclusion that some people can take is the church is good, but I don't know if it's true.
Right.
So at the end of the day, why have you chosen to come back to the church, and maybe to come to the conclusion that maybe it is good, but also true?
I would say, first off, I am converted to Christ and a member of the church, right? So, and that's always the order of importance to me. That's where my life is focused. I have a very powerful love for the Book of Mormon, because for me, that's where I feel like I came to know Jesus. And I love the New Testament. I love the Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles, and I'm teaching adult Sunday school, and I love to delve into that and teach those lessons in the New Testament this year, and I'm excited to teach them in the Book of Mormon next year. I do strongly believe that the Book of Mormon is a second witness of Jesus Christ, and that its revelation to Joseph Smith is essential in my spiritual journey. I believe that the temple is, in my mind, the purpose of restoration, because we can bless the whole world. This tiny little church that amounts to nothing in the population of the world has the capacity to bless the entire world, because of how we aim, in the purity of our desire, to reunite and bind ourselves to every single person in the family of heaven. I believe that the prophets, seers, and revelators that I have come to know are the very best of men, that those who lead the organizations of the church are men and women of great faith and pure desire to bless the lives of people around them. And so I want to listen to everything they have to say. And then I want to go to the Lord and say, of all that I've heard, of the things I'm studying, where I'm pondering and praying, what do you want me to act on now? And then be guided in that sense of, as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what would you have me do to move forward in my life and in that organization? So for me, it is true. It is true because it leads me to Christ. And it's not the only truth in the earth, because there are other places that lead me to Christ as well: music, literature, other things, the lives of the saintly people who surround me, whether they have ever heard of our church or not. But this is where I'm planted, and this is where I'm striving to grow.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I think that's a perfect way to wrap up. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for the time you've given me to have this interview. I truly appreciate it.
Yeah.
And before we finish, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
It's delightful to get to know you a little bit, and I'm hope that your efforts are going to be useful to to many people. I'm sorry for the time you're going to have to spend to put the subtitles on this. But again, I just hope that in all the conversations you're having, that it's allowing individuals to think in new ways and to broaden their hearts, to open their arms a little wider to those around them, and to feel more deeply the love of Jesus Christ in their lives. So thank you for your discipleship and the good work you're doing.
Thank you. And I'll do this last part in Spanish. Pero a cada uno de ustedes, muchas gracias por ver este episodio. Y si les gustó, pueden compartirlo, pueden comentar o suscribirse. Y ya saben la lista completa. Voy a dejar los links de nuestras plataformas en la descripción. Y recuerden que el propósito de esto es que el viaje de cada uno sea más informado.